I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. Countdown to a shutdown. We'll look at what could happen if the government closes for business on Friday. Plus, learning about the faith from Homer Simpson. It happened at a Theology on Tap, and we'll take you there.
I have to admit, I didn't really realize there was so much depth to The Simpsons growing up.
And search and rescue. One author shares his ideas for bringing people back into the Catholic Church.
For somebody to say that I'm going to leave the Catholic Church because of the scandals, to me, is like saying I'm going to stop going to the dentist because my dentist doesn't take care of his teeth.
Well, good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. Despite ongoing discussions in Washington, it seems almost inevitable that come tomorrow, the federal government will shut down after Republicans and Democrats have failed to reach an agreement on a new budget. The GOP-led House today passed what was considered a symbolic continuing resolution that would keep the government going for another week, but the president says he would veto that if it reaches his desk. Now, congressional leaders on both sides say they want to avoid a shutdown, but not everyone thinks that a government shutter would be such a bad thing. CNN's Jim Acosta is in Washington with more on that part of the story.
Shut it down! Shut it down!
As the clock ticks toward a shutdown, the Tea Party is turning up the heat. At a rally near the steps of the Capitol, conservative activists urged Republicans to stand and fight.
You would support a government shutdown? Absolutely. It's time for taxpayers to take back the government, and let's shut it down for a few days. It's not going to come to a catastrophic end.
We will not rest.
Indiana Republican Mike Pence was right there with them.
If liberals in the Senate would rather play political games and force a government shutdown instead of accepting a modest down payment on fiscal discipline and reform, I say shut it down.
But not all Tea Partiers are sure that's a good idea, despite appearances.
Shut her down.
And you're saying shut the government down?
I don't want to shut the government down. I'm making a point.
And what's that?
We need to get serious about cutting our budget.
Why hold a sign that says shut her down if you don't want to shut her down?
Making a point.
You're the extremist that I like to hang with.
Republican Michelle Bachmann also stopped short of calling for a shutdown, telling CNN she thinks a deal will happen.
You think we're going to get to a shutdown, Congresswoman? What do you think at this point?
I actually think that we will see a resolution by Friday. I think that in all likelihood it will happen.
That would be good news for thousands of federal employees who would be deemed non-essential by their agencies and furloughed.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the delay. I'm concerned about being able to pay my mortgage. I'm concerned about being able to pay my bills.
Democrats point out some of those workers perform critical tasks, like medical researchers.
I know you're working on that cure for cancer. I know you're working on that cure for Alzheimer's or autism or arthritis, sticking just with the A words. But you know what? Washington, the Congress says you're non-essential.
Well, that report from CNN's Jim Acosta there, and reports today say funding for abortion and climate change are among the sticking points in the budget battle. To talk more about all of this, I'm joined on the phone now by Stephen Schneck. He is the director of the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies at the Catholic University of America in Washington. Steve, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Glad to be here, Matt.
Well, it seems to me, now there's of course a lot of rhetoric, a lot of back and forth in Washington, as there has been as far back as I can remember anyway. But surrounding this, it seems to me like the major sticking point in the budget is no longer really even the numbers, but today it seemed to have morphed into something about sort of these policy riders that are attached to the budget and what they would do to, say, the EPA and to funding for Planned Parenthood and those other sorts of things. Do you get kind of the same sense?
Yeah, that seems to be about where they are. It's kind of funny, when you look at the proposals that are out there, and right now we're looking at a cut of about $35 billion, and this is for this year's 2011 budget. And that $35 billion is only 2% of the total deficit, that we'll be facing. So it's pretty astonishing that there's so much rancor about such a small portion of the federal budget this year. But that's what it's come to, and it does in fact look like a shutdown is looming.
All right, and if that does happen, what happens to just the average Joe out there? Are they going to see major changes? They're going to wake up Saturday morning and there's going to be something majorly different about the way that government is operating, or I guess a lack of operation?
Well, of course, one of the jokes going around is that the government would shut down and no one would notice. But in fact, these will be pretty sweeping changes. It will take a while before everyone starts to realize what's involved. But yeah, all sorts of things are going to close down. 800 federal government workers are going to be without jobs, temporarily at least. And a funny thing on that score, it actually will cost us money for each day that the government is shut down, rather than actually saving us any money. It's just because of the necessity of keeping operations running. And one of the things that probably below the radar screen, one of the things that will definitely be hit would be grants from the federal government to state and local governments. And right now, considering the very tricky financial state of state and local governments around the country, that might actually be one of the areas where we see, the real pinch in the shoe leather.
Sure. And one thing that I think I could probably go on and talk all day about, especially after seeing Congressman Paul Ryan's budget proposal that was released earlier this week, is sort of the discrepancy about how that proposal would treat the richest Americans versus the poorest Americans.
Well, first of all, we have to distinguish what Representative Ryan has proposed from the shutdown that's looming right now. These are two separate issues. The shutdown that's looming right now is about the budget for this year, the 2011 budget. And what Representative Ryan is proposing is something for all future budgets. But in fact, Ryan's budget, I think by any measure of the imagination, is really a very hard hit from the perspective of the church's teachings about the responsibilities of government and society. As Catholics, our social teaching requires us to provide a certain preference, for example, for taking care of the poor and the most vulnerable and the marginalized in our society. And if you look at the budget that's proposed by Representative Ryan, it's just astonishing, from that perspective. As you pointed out, Matt, this is a budget that cuts the tax rates on the richest of the rich, while at the same time eliminating very basic programs to Head Start, to community health centers, to emergency food and shelter operations, to international food aid. These things are all cut, eliminated, while at the same time they're lowering the taxes on the richest of Americans. So it's a really strong contrast, I think, between the way we Catholics are supposed to be thinking about these things and what's being proposed.
Absolutely. Well, and we will continue as all of the discussion around the budget this time around, and as you said, for future budgets as well, continues. Steve Schneck, the director of the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies at the Catholic University of America in Washington. Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to me today. Really
My pleasure, Matt. Anytime.
Thanks. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents ahead. An earthquake strikes again off the coast of Japan. We'll have the latest on that and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, a search and rescue effort is underway to bring people back to the Catholic Church. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, Japan was on tsunami alert again after a magnitude 7.1 aftershock rocked the already ruined northeast coastline earlier today. Well, this is just one view of today's quake. The epicenter was even closer to land than the magnitude 9.0 quake that struck last month. There were no casualties reported and no further damage to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, thankfully. The company that owns that plant says workers were evacuated after the quake struck. Now, Catholic Relief Service organization Caritas International continues to help victims in areas affected by last month's quake. Well, the difficulties are far from over in the Ivory Coast. The country's archbishop is reportedly in hiding as fighting continues in the troubled nation. Archbishop Jean-Pierre Coutois told the Vatican news agency Fides that from where he was, he could hear massive explosions. Rebel forces are reportedly continuing their attack on the presidential residence, where Laurent Gbagbo is barricaded. Gbagbo has refused to leave office after losing the election last year. Well, first, Terry Jones put the Quran on trial, but now the controversy-seeking pastor of Dove World Outreach in Florida says he's going to put the Prophet Muhammad on trial for crimes against humanity. At least 24 people have died in Afghanistan after protests ignited over last month's Quran burning, and Jones admits to being on the receiving end of hundreds of death threats. Jones first gained attention last year after threatening to burn the Quran on September 11th, but he eventually backed off those plans. Now, in related news, Pope Benedict has accepted the resignation of the bishop in Pakistan who called for Jones' arrest. Lahore Archbishop Lawrence Saldana will turn 75 later this year. That's the age at which bishops are required to submit their resignations. Well, the name-calling continues in New Hampshire, where a second lawmaker took a verbal jab at Manchester Bishop John McCormick. The New Hampshire newspaper, The Union Leader, reports State Representative Timothy Comerford sent out an email to fellow lawmakers in which he called McCormick a corrupt scumbag. That came less than a week after New Hampshire House Speaker DJ Betancourt called McCormick a pedophile pimp after McCormick spoke at a rally to voice opposition to state budget cuts. Betancourt says he was going to personally apologize to McCormick in a meeting scheduled for today. Well, a story that has gripped the hearts and minds of New Yorkers has finally come to a close. Yesterday, a funeral was held at the Oratory Church of St. Boniface in downtown Brooklyn for Louis Dwayne Mosley, the 18-month-old boy whose life of abuse came to an end after being viciously beaten by his foster mother's companion, Kasheen Oliver. Oliver is charged with assault. Those charges could be upgraded to homicide. But there is a silver lining to this story, as Mosley's heart was donated to a 1-year-old girl in Baltimore. Well, from Philadelphia, a wrongful death lawsuit has been filed against the Archdiocese there. A family says a relative committed suicide after the Archdiocese of Philadelphia dismissed the man's claim of having been sexually abused by a priest. The accused priest is reportedly one of the 24 men the Archdiocese placed on administrative leave in the last 2 months, following a grand jury report on abuse by clergy. And the day the suspensions were announced, Philadelphia Archbishop Cardinal Justin Regali said that he was truly sorry for the harm done to sexual abuse victims. Regali said he prayed that the efforts by the Archdiocese would help rebuild people's trust in the church. Well, a judge has ruled that pharmacists in Illinois cannot be forced to sell the morning after pill. A suit was filed in response to a 2005 ruling from then-Governor Rod Blagojevich ordering pharmacists to fill prescriptions without making moral judgments. The judge ruled that the order was unconstitutional and in violation of the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is intended to prevent laws that significantly burden free exercise of religion. Well, many schools in the Brooklyn Diocese are taking advantage of new technologies to reach and teach students, and there's an effort underway to encourage more schools to get on board. Earlier today, Transvideo Communications, the parent company of NET, along with the Catholic Telemedia Network, awarded thousands of dollars in technology grants to some deserving schools. 6 principals were in the current studio today to accept technology grant awards given by the Catholic Telemedia Network, or CTN, a service provided by Transvideo Communications. CTN offers educational programming in nearly every classroom in the Diocese of Brooklyn. In January, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, Vicar for Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, sent out a letter asking how frequently the schools use the education network. Any schools that responded before the deadline were entered into a raffle, and the awards were presented to the schools chosen in a subsequent drawing. The money will be used by the schools to invest in up-to-date classroom aids like iPads and other mobile devices and faster broadband connections. Monsignor Harrington was on hand to present the checks this afternoon, along with yours truly.
I am absolutely thrilled, and St. Rosalima School feels blessed that we were awarded this technology grant, the grand prize of $25,000. The day we won the award, I was trembling. I was so excited.
Monsignor Harrington stressed the importance of technology in today's schools.
A person sends their child to a Catholic school primarily because they want their child to learn the faith. They want them to be raised with good moral values. At the same time, they want to ensure that their child has the best opportunity for education, and ensuring that we have the latest and most sophisticated technology enables our teachers to do their job better.
After the presentation, I led the group on a quick tour of the studio. He usually sits here and calls all the shots. The awards were given to commemorate CTN's move from a broadcast system of delivery to broadband. The broadband system is set to be in place by the beginning of the 2011 school year. A lot of fun to have them here, and congratulations to those grant recipients. Stay tuned, there's much more Currents ahead. Coming up, when you think of great religious and moral teachers, Homer Simpson is probably the last name that comes to mind, but here he takes center stage.
I think any way that we're able to get a deeper understanding of ourselves as people, as Christians, absolutely 100% for it.
Welcome back. Well, have you ever played the party game Gossip? Some people call it the telephone game. It works like this. You line people up. You whisper something to the first person on one end of the line, all right? And then everybody kind of goes down in the line whispering what was said until the last person at the other end of the line, usually works best with, at least 8 or 10 people, they announce at the other end of the line what they heard. Well, that is really the hilarious part, actually. Usually what the first person whispered sounds nothing like is what is announced at the end. We used to do that actually at the church I grew up in at parties and things for the senior citizens. And it was just a lot of fun. And we did it, I believe, at a birthday party too. It's a lot of fun. Well, that game actually came to life last fall when an Italian Jesuit paper did a scholarly analysis of the long-running cartoon The Simpsons. Well, the analysis concluded that the show is one of the few cartoons that includes faith as a frequent theme. Well, by the time the Vatican newspaper, the Roman Observer, got a hold of it, they declared that Homer J. Simpson was Catholic. Everybody do it with me now. Don't! Okay, I don't know if my Homer impression is all that great. But at a recent Theology on Tap, there was no declaration of what faith Homer follows, if any. But men and women did gather to examine the religious and moral teachings of everyone's favorite yellow, bug-eyed dad.
Homer, are you actually giving up your faith?
No. Well, yes.
Religion on The Simpsons is something that is prevalent in just about every episode. In one way or another, religion plays a role in The Simpsons that is unique compared to other television shows. In this particular Theology on Tap, we'll be talking about the religious and moral teachings of Homer Simpson. This will be an opportunity to talk about the many Christian images, both positive and negative, within the show, as well as the fact that The Simpsons is very much a satire regarding contemporary society. So it'll give us a chance to talk about that and how that satire pertains to religion.
Okay.
The show prides itself on holding up a mirror to society and saying, this is what we do. These are our good and bad points as Americans. These are our positives and negatives. These are our hypocrisies, etc. So what can we learn about the faith from Homer? What can we learn about ourselves from Homer Simpson, both good and bad? By studying what Homer says and what Homer teaches, I think it gives us an opportunity to take a step back during this period of Lent and say, is that how I'm living? Do I agree with him? Do I agree with him in theory? Do I agree with him in practice? Is that how I am as a Christian? So it's a way to take a look at the world through the eyes of Homer Simpson and then help to evaluate ourselves as Christians. Homer is depicted really on the show as self-centered, oblivious. He's overindulgent in food and drink. He kind of goes to church with his family because that's what he's meant to do or asked to do or supposed to do. What does he do when he's in church? Anybody know? Why, after 22 years, 22 seasons, why is it that we still have a certain liking? Why is it that we still have a certain interest? If you look at the episodes of the show and the writing about the show and the film, most of the time, he redeems himself in trying to do good for his children. Writers have said to us that that's why Homer, after all these years, remains such an endearing character, because he is well-meaning. Despite his many faults, Homer has, at the end of the day, a respect for the Lord and tends to turn to him in prayer very often. Maybe it's misguided, maybe his motives and maybe his virtues are questionable, but he does turn to the Lord, and in many cases we see that the Lord certainly does love him as a person.
For me, I think The Simpsons were on a superficial level, very comical and entertaining. I have to admit, I didn't really realize there was so much depth to The Simpsons growing up.
We as people don't like to look at the mirror very often and be critical. But if we can look at ourselves through the medium of a Homer Simpson, satire, buffoonery, but yet still get the idea of, hey, you know, sometimes I do that. Or not just negative, but even positive. I think any way that we're able to get a deeper understanding of ourselves as people, as Christians, absolutely 100% for it.
God, I gotta ask you something. What's the meaning of life?
Homer, I can't tell you that.
Come on.
You'll find out when you die.
I can't wait that long.
See, you never can tell when you're going to be able to learn something, even watching The Simpsons. You can learn something about your faith. I love it. Stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up. When we return, getting Catholics to come home with the help of the man who wrote the book about it.
We have to know our faith so well because we have to contend with these different messages that are competing for our attention.
Well, finally tonight, just before the start of Lent, the organization Catholics Come Home found itself the unlikely topic of conversation on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. The show's host launched an attack on a TV ad encouraging people back to the Catholic Church.
Catholic Church has made an ad, and I'm not kidding about this. This is a real ad that they put in. It cost a lot of money. It looks like a Super Bowl commercial. Very slick, asking the people to come back to the Catholic Church because they are losing customers. If you go to Mass, it looks like a Broadway show, all white hair.
But it looks like the laugh it might be on Bill Maher, actually. First of all, the ad was produced by Catholics Come Home, a lay Catholic outreach organization and not the Catholic Church. And also, there are a lot of people who don't have gray hair that go to Broadway shows. I'll say that as well. And secondly, the church continues to grow, no matter what Bill Maher may think or say. So how did Catholics Come Home respond? Well, unsurprisingly, they invited lapsed Catholic Bill Maher and his viewers back to church. Bringing Catholics back home was on everyone's minds as author Patrick Madrid discussed his new book that's called Search and Rescue at the Siena Forum for Faith and Culture.
Let it never be said that the Catholic Church is an enemy of science or the Catholic Church is afraid of science. Not at all, because science is the human ability.
Today was the opening event of the Siena Forum for Faith and Culture here at St. Catherine of Siena Parish on East 68th Street. And to open the Siena Forum, we brought in Patrick Madrid, a nationally known, internationally known apologist, Catholic apologist, and to do a weekend-long presentation actually, about the faith. His topic was entitled Search and Rescue, 10 Reasons to Bring People Back to the Church.
We talked about how we can explain and share and defend our Catholic faith with former Catholics, people who have fallen away, and also with people who have never been Catholic, people who are far away from the Catholic Church perhaps. I wanted to show how we can do certain things that are very often effective in helping people come into the church, but also how to avoid the things that are not very good.
I feel that the lecture was good. I like him, actually. He makes you laugh. I think everybody was enjoying the time. I think he's a very good speaker. I became a Catholic recently, about 3 years. I was a very strict Baptist. I was born in a Baptist religion. Since I am newly Catholic, then I want to know more about Catholicism. I want to know more about the origin of Catholicism, and if anyone can give me information on it, I am there to get that information as much as I can.
We have an obligation to constantly propose to the faithful the truth, the beauty, and the goodness that we know despite all the problems that reside within the Roman Catholic Church.
This is a very difficult time, and there's absolute truth to the fact that there have been some terrible things done. But not for a minute do I ever lose my confidence in Christ or the Church. For somebody to say that I'm going to leave the Catholic Church because of the scandals, to me, is like saying I'm going to stop going to the dentist because my dentist doesn't take care of his teeth. This generation is different than any previous generation, I'm convinced, because there's so much information coming to us, and there's a lot of competing ideologies out there, many competing messages. And so previous generations didn't have to worry about that, but we have to be extra vigilant, and we have to know our faith so well because we have to contend with these different messages that are competing for our attention.
So hearing Patrick is really helpful because it gives you some insights, little tidbits, little pearls of wisdom, and I appreciate his being here and doing this, and his insights and his stories and past experiences. And also thanks St. Catherine's for doing this. I think this forum is a great thing, and I'm glad that they'll have more in the future.
Thank you very much.
And we have much more about efforts to get lapsed Catholics back into the pews over on our website. Just go to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave. All right, confess. Now, I know you're tired of me asking you if you've uploaded your confession video at iconfess.com, right? Well, rejoice, because today is the last day that I make my pitch to you. So here goes. Just go to iconfess.com. You can enter there for your chance to win thousands of dollars in scholarship money. Trust me, it is just as easy as confession. All you have to do is submit a 1-minute video encouraging folks to go to confession on April 18th. That is also known as Reconciliation Monday. Just go to iconfess.com for more information. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow night, we meet a young lady who survived a shark attack, became a top surfer, and just had a movie made about her life. You won't want to miss that. Until then, be sure to check us out online at currentsny.net. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question, maybe a comment or a story idea, email us. Our address is dropusaline@currentsny.net. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.